Hello and welcome to Rajya Sabha Television. You're watching The Big Picture with me, Frank Pereira. The powerful GST Council is currently meeting to revisit compliance rules for businesses and discuss and make what have been described as structural changes in the new national tax regime, acting on feedback and complaints from businesses. The review comes amid criticism over the way the GST has been implemented. 2 days ago, Prime Minister Narendra Modi promised that glitches would be fixed, and he held a meeting yesterday with the Finance Minister Arun Jaitley and BJP Chief Amit Shah. Jaitley heads the GST Council. On this edition of The Big Picture, we will analyze how we can work towards a simpler GST regime. Joining me on the program today are Nitin Desai, former Chief Economic Advisor of the Government of India. And also joining us is Saloni Roy, Senior Director, Deloitte. Thank you to both my guests for joining me on this edition of The Big Picture. I'd like to start with the lady on the program first. It's been almost 3 years since, 3 months, I beg your pardon, since GST has been in place. What are some of the biggest challenges as far as the GST is concerned?
So the biggest challenges are all resting with the working of the GSTN. It's the portal. I think, there are glitches there. Taxpayers are finding it difficult to comply with, registration as well as return filing. And, there have been postponements on the date of return filing. So there is a considerable anxiousness in the minds of taxpayers as to really how to go about the compliances. 3 returns every month is quite something, and especially if you have to report each and every transaction, that's a considerable challenge. So that's principally been, the challenge. The principal challenge, I would say, is compliance. Of course, there are other issues, regarding taxability. There are certain gray areas. But broadly, I think from a legal, entirely tax structure perspective, it's good. From a supply chain and operational perspective, because GST is highly technology driven, that is something that taxpayers are finding it tough to deal with.
Sure. Mr. Desai, how would you look at the last 3 months since GST has come into being?
What I'd say is that, like all economists we were all always in favor of GST, but it was supposed to be a good and simple tax. It's probably a good tax, but I'm not at all sure it's a simple tax. And if I were advising the government now, which I'm not, I would have said, don't do everything all at once. Space it out. This is a very big change. And please remember, you're doing this change in an Indian market economy, where a large part of it is highly unorganized. Pretty large chunks of it never paid taxes ever, So they worked, either illegally because they were evading it, or sometimes we had built a system where they were not taxed. In textiles, for instance, the whole logic there was, if I tax the yarn, I don't need to tax anything downstream. And that was the idea of simplification then, in the days when I used to be Chief Economic Advisor. That you tax the yarn, then you don't have to bother about what's happening downstream, so that you don't have to get into that. And therefore, a lot of the textile traders who are very agitated are agitated because they were never part of the proper tax net. They paid tax on the yarn, and that's it. That's all that was required. There was hardly anything else that was taxable beyond that point. So I'd say that we should have remembered, we are doing this in a country where a very large number of people in the trading system were not involved in a sort of highly sophisticated system of tax assessment, payment, etc. They didn't even have they probably were not even fully computerized in terms of their own accounting operations. So if I had my way, I would have said, let's first focus on getting GST as a single tax through. I think the government did a good job in getting an agreement amongst the states. Yes, we would have liked to see a simpler tax structure. It's more complicated than it needs to be. That is incidentally part of the problem. So I would have said, let's first do that. Then next step, I would have tried to simplify the tax structure, try and bring in the stuff which has been left out, probably bring in the whole technology-based compliance system, which is essentially what it is. Basically, the government is decentralizing tax compliance. So in a way, it's by this matching of invoices, They are hoping that at least in B2B transactions, it will get automatically done. That's okay if you have a business system which is much more sophisticated than ours. I would have gone about it in stages. Initially said, okay, companies beyond a certain turnover get into GST, and next year I'll lower that turnover and keep on lowering it. What about the exemption? You say, yes, okay, if your turnover is 75 lakhs, you can compound your thing and do it. But what is 75 lakhs? 75 lakhs turnover on a 10% margin, the guy is making 7.5 lakhs. So if that means a guy whose total annual earning is 8 lakhs, is supposed to go into this complicated system, hire accountants, etc. I'd say they should have thought through the fact that they're bringing a highly sophisticated system into a marketing system which is not as sophisticated.
True.
And say, well, that's stages. But now you can't do that.
Yeah.
You can't backtrack. But I suspect there will be some relaxations which will come in time. They will have to do that, maybe in terms of the frequency of filing, etc., etc. But I wish they had done it in a much more phased and staged manner. And then I think we would have had a successful GST.
Okay, fair enough. Let me also get Sandeep Bamzai into the picture now. He joins us on the phone line, Editor-in-Chief of the Financial Chronicle. Sandeep Bamzai, as far as the GST is concerned, these teething problems were always expected. Everyone said right at the beginning, that there would be some kind of a problem in the first 2 or 3 quarters. And we are seeing that actually being played out. And the government, I think, is probably going to get its act together and also try and deal with this problem at the earliest.
True, there's no doubt in my mind also on the ability of Indians to absorb technology. But as Mr. Desai rightly pointed out, this at one level was rammed through. If it had been done in a slightly more phased sort of manner, it would have been that much more successful. What are the big issues before us? Obviously, there is a technology platform which is the key interface between the trader, exporter, taxpayer, and the government. When the GSTN portal itself was crashing, when the GSTN portal itself was collapsing under the weight of the pressure, then the people who were involved in setting up that technological platform and the government should have actually thought it through, that would it be able to take this kind of pressure? Would it be able to deal with this kind of intensity? We have failed on that front, and I'm quite, at one level, I'm quite shocked, because one would have thought that given the fact that we are extremely good with tech, we've actually failed to roll out this major reform, which is predicated on the back of technology, and we've actually failed in this endeavor. Now we come to procedural compliance issues. You have a CAT, which is a traders body which represents traders all across the country. They were never brought on board, and these are the people who represent small traders across the length and breadth of this land. They were never brought on board. They were never told what exactly needs to be done. So again, as Mr. Desai said, a small trader or a small exporter, does he have the wherewithal and expertise? Does he have a back office in terms of computerization? Does he have an accountant? No, obviously not. And then, when you get into the nitty-gritty, the filing, again, it comes to the same thing, that does he have the expertise wherewithal? No. Reverse charge mechanism, for instance, where it was not merely the supplier, but the recipient had to pay. I mean, it goes beyond compliance. Then you have something called an HSN code, which is to explain it, harmonized system nomenclature code, which is basically a coding of commodities which are processed by various people. That is a failure. Reverse charge mechanism is something which nobody has been able to understand. Filing is an issue. Exporters today are basically railing against the fact that they don't even have working capital. So
Sure.
obviously there are going to be job losses in the unorganized sector. And let's understand, when we talk about exporters, we talk about the MSME sector. So for instance, Hasib Prabhu, the J&K finance minister, I believe today has been haranguing about how handicrafts need to have a much lower level of taxation. Jewelry, antique jewelry. I mean, there are so many issues that are related to this. And I mean, it's great to go in for reform. I'm all for reform, and particularly structural and deep reform of this kind. But then ensure that the requisite mechanisms are in place so that the delivery is smooth.
Okay,
In
fair
this
enough.
case, there's chaos.
Okay, right. Let me see what the other panelists also have to say about that, and then I'll come back to you for another reaction. Do stay with us. You know, Saloni, as far as the tax slabs itself are concerned, you know, the GST was supposed to be a simple tax structure, but then you have so many tax slabs in between. You have at least 5 slabs, you know, and then you have the sin goods and the cess and everything else that's attached to it. Do you believe that it could have been far less complicated than it is in its present form right now?
Frank, you've raised a very important question. It should be actually far less complicated. We have multiple slabs. But if we look at it, you know, globally, when you look at VAT or GST regimes globally, there are far fewer slabs. There's probably a single slab and then maybe one demerit rate and another, you know, essential goods and services rate. So you don't have as many slabs as we have in India. So I believe that there will be a time, maybe, you know, we will get to that gradually. It will take us some time to get there, where, you know, rates will get rationalized. India is one of the most highly taxed economies. So there are, for example, a couple of countries which have high tax rates like ours. So there's Hungary, which has a 27% peak rate, and then Ghana, which is 40%. But we go beyond that.
Yeah.
So you know, if you combine the cess as well as the, you know, the tax rate, our rates go way beyond. So we are clearly the top most taxed nation in the world. And added to that are the complexities in the GST compliance. So I believe GST is an excellent idea. It will take us somewhere between 3 to 5 years to grapple with all the issues that we are facing. I think government is willing to hear us. That's how I see it. I'm glad that, you know, the council meeting was actually advanced. You know, it shows that the government recognizes that businesses are having issues, major issues. So it was a good initiative to advance it rather than keep it after Diwali. I hope the reform measures that are taken, I can understand that they can't have all the reforms all at once.
Yes.
But gradually and with time, I think it will take us time. I think there's no other way. It will take us time, but we will get there. I'm very confident of that.
Okay, so the teething problems will continue at least for the time being, but we will eventually get there, is what you're suggesting. You know, Mr. Desai, in hindsight, would you say that this decision could have been taken a little later, maybe, you know, taking all stakeholders on board and then coming up with a comprehensive plan or a decision?
I would say that I'm frightened by the word comprehensive, Frank. My whole thing is do it in steps. Don't try and do everything all at once. Let me just say a word on the rate structure. I think 2 things. One, I suspect that we ended up with a complicated rate structure because they wanted revenue neutrality not just in the aggregate, but for each state and for each product. Saying, how ye to bahut mehenga ho jayega, you know, ye to bahut sasta ho jayega. So, given the previous rates, there's a second more difficult problem. You see, a 28% rate clearly creates a very large return to what is politely called tax arbitrage. That's just the polite term for it.
Yes.
But because in the earlier days, what happened was, what people evaded was, let's say, a sales tax. And that product would have had, say, an excise duty, which would have been, let's say, more than half of it, which was being collected somewhere else at the manufacturing stage. And the trader who was selling you the stuff without a bill was only saving you the sales tax. Now, if he sells it to you without the bill, you're not just saving the sales tax, you're saving the sales at what used to be the excise, which is 28%.
Yes.
So the returns to not file tax evasion have become very high with these huge rates. And there are also other complications because the multiplicity of rates, about set-offs, the fact that it's a product called milk has about 9 different categorizations and so on. So I'd say that they should have thought through some of the downside of having these multiple rates and having extremely high rates. And 28% is not the highest. We have more, others also. But 28% itself. And that aspect that they should have understood, that this is the gain to the chap who's going to avoid taxes. Earlier, it used to be the 5% sales tax or 7% sales tax. Now it's 28%. This is going to be a big, big problem for them.
Okay, this is going to be a big problem is what you're suggesting. Sandeep Bamzai, what else do you foresee to be as a major challenge as far as the GST is concerned?
Look, Frank, look at what has transpired till now. You've had this convoluted flip-flop over passenger cars. If I am an investor, and mind you, this is the only bright spot in the economy. Motown is probably the only bright spot in the economy. And when I say Motown, I mean passenger cars, two-wheelers, LCVs, etc. Month after month, they're giving gangbuster performance. What did you do? You decided to, once GST was levied and it came into force, some of the states reported that car sales had gone up, but rates had come down. So logic says let market forces determine whatever happens. What did you do instead? You decided to levy a cess. Now, if I am an international car manufacturer and I have invested heavily in Chakkan or Sri Perambuttur or Hosur or wherever, or Gurgaon or wherever, what is the logic of being taxed twice? And these, you look at the economic situation at the moment, it is perilous. Most of it is a wasteland. The only thing that is working is, like I said, automobiles, the entire pack. And then you go ahead and you levy a cess. Okay, agreed that there was a rethink after pressure was mounted on the government and the cess came down, well, maybe not dramatically, but it came down considerably, making it slightly easier. But why are things like this not processed? There is a team of people which has been working on this. It's not something that you snapped your fingers and there and then you switched over to a different regime. So there is a whole team of people, of personnel who are obviously crunching numbers, doing the math. It baffles me that you actually go in for something like this, a flip-flop of this magnitude, and you play around with a sector which is actually giving you dividend. So and I hope that as we move on, today there is talk that at least 60 items, they're looking at least 60 items where they're going to cut rates. Now these are things that they should have thought of earlier. And there are so many items. Mr. Desai pointed out milk. It's a classic example. And there are so many other items. Basmati rice is another item which is being contested at the moment because there are varied items of rice. So
sure.
When you get into the granularity and go deeper into the concentric circle, you will find that there are issues and issues and issues.
Okay, fair enough. Mr. Desai, are there too many issues to deal with at the moment?
There will be, because they've tried to do too many things all at once, but I hope they do deal with it. I have great respect for the people who are involved in this whole exercise. My only fear is that I think they went ahead with it without fully understanding how the Indian market system actually operates.
But is it as bad as people are making it out to be?
I think it will settle down. The nice thing about this country is that it all learns to live with everything in one way or another. So it will settle down. People will find their ways around it. Indian businessmen are very good at finding ways around difficult regulatory hurdles. This is, in fact, one of the things when we do an information system, a sensible person doing an information system will always hire an ethical hacker. saying, now you try and get into my system.
Yeah.
So I know what the I learned the vulnerabilities. I wish they do the same thing with policy. Okay, we're going to do this. And you hire somebody who's an expert at helping people to evade taxes and laws, and says, let's design a system of ethical chaps doing this, so that we do it for.
That's a great way of looking at it.
So that we can ask them, just look at this and tell me how do you advise your client how to get around all this, you see, and then fix it, you see. But obviously this is a little unrealistic what I'm suggesting. What we do with ethical hackers, I'm sure it can't be done. But basically, one of the things that could have been done was what Sandeep was just mentioning. They could have consulted the traders a little bit more. I know the traders would have said, nahi karo, mat karo, etc., etc. But you could always have gotten them past that and say, oh, if you are good at it, you better tell us what is it that will work. And you could have gotten them to come up with constructive suggestions on how it could be made to work. And my suspicion is, one of the things they would have said is, don't bring in this very complicated, sort of machine-based compliance system so quickly. Give us time to get our own systems more in shape and maybe space it out over a couple of years.
Okay.
Maybe that's what they would have said.
Okay. Closing comments now. Saloni, the way forward really as far as the GST is concerned, what do you think is the best way forward?
I think the GSTN really needs to start working efficiently. I know of instances where GST migration has taken 11 months. That's far too long. I mean, it's an exceptional case, but like they say, babies are born in 9 months, so GST migration took 11 months. And then there are other issues. You can't amend a registration today. There's no field available for that. There are issues regarding uploading digital signatures. Then when you submit a return, there are differences of submission, filed. I know of an instance when you log in and you get details of another taxpayer. So all these aspects. So I think GSTN needs to, be more robust. And secondly, I think compliance needs to be made simpler, at least for the smaller threshold. Basically
you can't even call it businesses, but I don't know what to call them really, but yeah, your chicky makers and whatever else who have to pay 18% tax.
75 lakhs is not a very high turnover.
Yes, it isn't. True. Sandeep Bamzai, your closing comments on the program. Okay, we seem to have lost the line there with Sandeep Bamzai, but Mr. Desai, close the show for us.
Well, close the show. Basically, let's get back to the basics, which is, in the long run, this is a very good move. It's a move towards making India one market. So let's all try and make it work. And all includes people in the government. So let them not get too committed to what they have done. If it requires substantial changes, do it. Because the basic idea is a good one and a sound one. So let's just do it.
Rigid deadlines for the time being, are they counterproductive?
I think so. I think we should have looser deadline. We should be more, and make it something which people realize is beneficial to them. Initially, a lot of people said, very wonderful. Now my truck can come from Bihar to Bombay without stoppages. Now suddenly they're going to bring in an e-way bill which will be examined. And you know what's happening? A lot of truckers are saying, I will not take it unless you have a GSTN number. So the small guy is stuck there. He can't send his stuff. So I'd say that be relaxed, but because the idea is a good one, and sell that basic principle to the country. This is a good idea. Let's all make it work. Maybe it'll take us a few years. I hope it doesn't take as long as 3 to 5 years. I hope we can do it in a little less. But let's try and make it work over time.
Let's try and make it work collectively over time.
Collectively over time. And don't try and do everything now. And don't get stuck on saying, on trying to defend what you have done. If it needs to be changed, change it.
Okay, fair enough. All right. On that note, then we'll call it a wrap on this edition of The Big Picture. I'd like to thank my guests, Nitin Desai, Sandeep Bamzai, and Saloni Roy for joining me on the program and putting things into perspective for us. That's all the time we have today. See you again next time.